Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku controlled dragons as the last dragon rider. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The rain fell in a listless, indifferent sheet over Mizutifa. It was the kind of rain that didn't wash things clean but simply made the grime of the city streets gleam under the neon glow of billboards. For Izuku Midoriya, it was a fitting soundtrack to the funeral of a lifelong dream. Each step was a leaden weight, his bright red shoes, once a symbol of his bold aspiration to walk in his idol's footsteps, now squelching miserably against the pavement. He was numb. A deep, hollow numbness had settled in his chest, a vacuum where a burning, sunbright hope had lived for 14 years. All Might's words echoed in the hollow space, each one a hammer blow against the fragile stained glass image he had built of his future. It's not wrong to dream. However, you need to be realistic, kid. The words hadn't been cruel. That was the worst part. They had been kind, pragmatic, and delivered with the weary weight of a man who had seen too much. They had been the truth, and the truth had shattered him more completely than any villain's punch ever could. He clutched the straps of his yellow backpack, his knuckles white. Inside, the charred, waterlogged remains of his hero analysis for the future. Number 13 felt like a stone. An hour ago, he had been thrilled to have it signed by his hero. Now, the bold signature felt like an autograph on a death certificate. The death of Deku, the hero. All that was left was Izuku, the quirkless. The events of the day played back in a cruel, unrelenting loop. Katsuki Bakugo's sneering face, smoke curling from his palms. If you want to be a hero so bad, there's a quick way to do it. Believe that you'll have a quirk in your next life and take a swan dive off the roof of the building. The suffocating, cloying horror of the sludge villain. The inability to breathe, the desperate scrabbling, the terrifying realization that this was it. This was how he would die, drowning on dry land, consumed by a monster made of filth. Then, the booming laughter, the iconic silhouette against the sky. Have no fear! Why? Because I am here, salvation. Ah. The dream reignited, only to be snuffed out moments later on a cold, windswept rooftop. The great symbol of peace had deflated, both literally and figuratively, revealing a skeletal, wounded man who bled and coughed, and bled some more. He had shown Izuku his gruesome, life-altering injury, a wound dealt by a villain of unimaginable power. He had shown him the harsh reality behind the heroic smile, and in that reality, there was no room for a quirkless boy. No, I don't think you can become a hero without a quirk. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, a fresh wave of tears mixing with the rain on his cheeks. He had run on pure, stupid instinct to save Kaken. He had faced the same villain All Might had struggled to contain, and for a few desperate seconds, his pathetic, quirkless actions had made a difference. They had given his hero the opening he needed, and what was his reward? A scolding from the pro-heroes. Death Arms chiding his recklessness. Kamui Woods calling it a suicidal act. Bakugo, on the other hand, was praised for his powerful quirk, his fighting spirit. No one saw the terror in his eyes. They only saw his strength. No one saw the desperate courage in Izuku's. They only saw his weakness. He finally reached the small apartment complex that had been his entire world. He trudged up the stairs, the squelch of his shoes a mournful announcement of his arrival. He fumbled with the key, his hands trembling, and pushed the door open. Izuku! Oh, thank goodness, you're home. I was so worried. I saw the news about the villain attack near your school and... His mother, Inko Midoriya, rushed to the doorway, her words tumbling out in a torrent of relieved anxiety. She stopped short when she saw his face. The false, wobbly smile he tried to muster collapsed instantly. His expression was a ruin. His eyes, normally so bright and full of life, were dull and empty, red-rimmed from crying. His green hair was plastered to his forehead, and he was soaked to the bone. Izuku, honey, what happened? She whispered, her own eyes welling with sympathetic tears. He couldn't speak. He couldn't form the words to tell her that her son was a failure, that the dream she had so tearfully supported, the one he had clung to like a drowning man to a raft, had finally sunk, dragging him down with it. Instead, he pointed to the computer monitor in his small room, where an old video was paused. A video of All Might's debut, rescuing 100 people from a disaster with a fearless laugh. The video he had watched 1,000, no, 1,000,000 times. His voice was a raw, broken thing, a sound that tore at Inko's heart. He was so cool. He tried to smile, a pathetic, trembling curve of his lips. He saves everyone with a smile, no matter what trouble they're in. He's such an amazing hero. The dam broke. A choked sob escaped his throat, and he collapsed into his mother's arms, the grief he had held at bay since the rooftop finally consuming him. "I'm sorry, Mom," he wailed, his body shaking with the force of his despair. "I'm so sorry. All I ever wanted was to be like him." Inko wrapped her arms around her son, holding him tightly as if she could physically piece his broken heart back together. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She didn't tell him it would be okay. She just held him and cried with him, her tears a silent testament to a shared, impossible dream. In the quiet of their small apartment, surrounded by the monuments to his heroic obsession, Izuku Midoriya finally mourned. The next 2 days were a blur of gray. Izuku moved through the apartment like a ghost, his presence a quiet weight of sorrow. He didn't turn on the computer. He didn't watch Hero News. He didn't even touch his notebooks. They sat on his desk, a colorful graveyard of meticulous research and pointless hope. He ate what his mother put in front of him without tasting it, answered her worried questions with listless monosyllables, and spent most of his time staring at the ceiling of his room, the All Might poster seeming to mock him from every wall. Inko's heart ached with every silent moment. She had seen him sad before. She had seen him disappointed and frustrated after years of bullying and ostracization. But she had never seen him empty. The fire that had defined her son, his unquenchable, sometimes maddeningly optimistic spirit, had been extinguished. On the third morning, a Saturday, she couldn't stand it anymore. The sun was making a tentative appearance, its pale light filtering through the clouds. It was a fragile, hopeful light, and it gave her an idea, a memory from a long, long time ago. She knocked softly on his bedroom door. "Izuku? Honey, are you awake?" A muffled, "Yeah," was the only reply. She pushed the door open. He was sitting on his bed, still in his pajamas, staring at his own quirkless hands. "How would you feel about getting out of the city for a bit?" she asked, her voice gentle. "I was thinking we could go for a drive. There's a place I haven't been to since I was a little girl, an old shrine, up in the mountains. It's quiet. Peaceful." He didn't look up. "Why?" "Because," she said, stepping into the room and sitting on the edge of his bed. "You used to love exploring. Remember? Before all the quirk tests and the hero analysis, you just liked finding interesting rocks and weird bugs. You loved the woods." He flinched, a barely perceptible motion. He remembered. He also remembered that those had been the days before he understood what it meant to be different. The days before his world had been neatly divided into the powerful and the useless. "I don't really feel like it," he mumbled. "Please, Izuku," Inko insisted, her voice soft but firm. She put a hand on his shoulder. "For me. Let's just breathe some different air for a few hours. No heroes. No villains. Just trees and rocks. Then we can come home and you can go back to whatever you need to do. Okay?" He looked at her then, really looked at her. He saw the deep, purple smudges of worry under her eyes, the desperate plea etched into her features. She was trying so hard. She was drowning right alongside him. The realization sent a sharp pang of guilt through his numbness. He couldn't keep doing this to her. He gave a slow, tired nod. "Okay, Mom." The drive was quiet, but not as tense as the silence in the apartment had been. As the dense cityscape of Mizutifa gave way to sprawling suburbs and then, finally, to winding mountain roads, Izuku felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The air that filtered through the car's vents began to smell of damp earth, pine needles, and clean, cold stone instead of exhaust fumes and city rain. Tall, ancient cedars replaced skyscrapers, their massive trunks creating a canopy that dappled the road in shifting patterns of light and shadow. They parked in a small, gravel lot that was almost completely reclaimed by nature. The trailhead was marked by a weathered, moss-covered torii gate, its red paint faded to a pale orange. It was clear that very few people came here anymore. The shrine is dedicated to an old mountain spirit, Inko explained as they started up the stone-paved path. From before the age of quirks. They say it was a guardian of the forest. Izuku just nodded, his hands in his pockets. The path was steep, and the stones were slick with moss and moisture. The air was cool and carried the sound of a distant stream and the chattering of unseen birds. It was peaceful. He hated to admit it, but his mother had been right. The crushing weight of the city, of his failure, seemed to lighten just a little with every step he took deeper into the woods. After a 20-minute walk, they arrived. The shrine itself was a humble, wooden structure nestled in a small clearing. It was weathered and worn, the wood silvered with age, and the roof was a thick carpet of vibrant green moss. A stone basin, a chozuya, was overflowing with crystal-clear spring water, and a thick, braided rope, a shimanawa, hung from the eaves, signifying a sacred space. It felt ancient. It felt like it held secrets older than All Might, older than quirks, older than the entire society that had judged him and found him wanting. While his mother offered a quiet prayer at the main hall, Izuku found himself wandering off to the side. He felt drawn. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a strange, subtle pull, like a faint magnetic current tugging at the edge of his senses. It was a low hum that he felt in the soles of his feet more than he heard with his ears, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the solid rock face behind the shrine. His eyes scanned the wall of stone and tangled roots until he saw it, a dark, narrow opening, almost completely hidden by overgrown ferns and thick ivy. A small cave. The pull intensified, a silent, insistent call from the darkness within. Curiosity, an old, familiar friend he thought he had lost, stirred within him for the first time in days. "Mom, I'm just going to look over here for a second," he called out, his voice sounding oddly loud in the quiet clearing. "Okay, honey. Don't go too far." He pushed aside the heavy, damp leaves and squeezed through the opening. The cave was small, no bigger than his bedroom, and thankfully shallow. A few rays of sunlight pierced through a fissure in the ceiling, illuminating a swirl of dust motes in the cool, still air. The space smelled of petrichor, cold stone, and something else, something indescribably ancient, like ozone and slumbering power. The hum was stronger in here, a palpable thrum of energy that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. His eyes followed the sensation to its source. There, nestled in a natural hollow at the back of the cave, resting on a bed of soft, dry moss as if it had been placed there intentionally, was a stone. But it was unlike any stone he had ever seen. It was about the size of a small melon, perfectly smooth and ovate. Its color was a deep, impossible emerald green, shot through with veins of what looked like liquid gold. The surface wasn't uniform. It was covered in an intricate, fractal pattern that resembled overlapping scales, so subtle it was only visible when the light caught it just right. It seemed to absorb the dim light of the cave and glow with a soft, internal luminescence. Hesitantly, Izuku reached out a hand. The moment his fingertips brushed against the surface, a jolt, like a gentle pulse of static electricity, shot up his arm. And it was warm, not the passive warmth of a stone left in the sun, but a deep, living warmth, like a small, sleeping animal. The vibration intensified under his touch, a steady, rhythmic thrumming that felt almost like a slow, deep heartbeat. His analytical mind, dormant for days, kicked into gear. Geode? No, the surface is smooth, not crystalline. Some kind of fossilized egg? Possible, but the warmth and the energy it's giving off, that's not normal. A unique mineral formation? The patterns are too regular, too organic. He couldn't explain it. Science, biology, geology, none of the subjects he excelled at had an answer for this. But as he stood there, his hand resting on the strange object, another feeling washed over him, overriding his analytical thoughts. It was a profound sense of rightness, a feeling of recognition, of finding something he hadn't even known he was looking for. He felt an overwhelming, instinctual urge to protect it. He had to take it with him. Carefully, he wrapped his jacket around the stone, cradling it gently before sliding it into his backpack. The added weight was significant, but it was a comforting weight. A solid, tangible mystery. As he emerged from the cave, blinking in the daylight, he felt different. The hollow space in his chest was still there, but it wasn't a gaping void anymore. Now, it held a secret. A warm, humming, emerald green secret. The hike back to the car was different. He was no longer just going through the motions. He was aware of his surroundings, of the way the light filtered through the trees, of the sounds of the forest. He kept a hand on his backpack, feeling the steady, reassuring warmth through the fabric. For the first time since that horrible day, he wasn't thinking about heroes or quirks. He was thinking about the impossible object nestled against his back. That night, the stone sat on his desk, a silent, enigmatic guest in his all-might-themed bedroom. It seemed to drink in the light from his desk lamp, its inner glow more pronounced in the dim room. He had tried researching it online, typing in every possible search term he could think of: large green glowing stone, warm vibrating geode, emerald egg-shaped rock. The results were useless. Links to New Age crystal shops, geological forums discussing mundane minerals, and fantasy gaming wikis. There was no rational explanation. He spent hours just looking at it, occasionally reaching out to touch its smooth, warm surface. The rhythmic pulse was still there, a slow, steady thump-thump, thump-thump, that was deeply calming. It was a mystery, and a mystery was a problem to be solved. It was something to focus on, a puzzle to pour his analytical energy into instead of his grief. He eventually fell into a fitful sleep, his dreams filled with images of soaring green mountains and skies filled with impossible, winged shapes. He awoke late the next evening, the last vestiges of daylight painting his room in hues of orange and purple. He had slept through the entire day, a heavy, exhausted sleep. The apartment was quiet. His mom must have gone out for groceries. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, and his gaze fell upon the stone on his desk. And then, he remembered. The sludge villain. Kakin. All Might. The rooftop. The rain. The carefully constructed wall he had built around his despair crumbled. The stone had been a distraction, a temporary reprieve, but the truth of his situation came rushing back with the force of a tidal wave. He was still quirkless. He was still useless. His dream was still dead. He slumped forward, his face in his hands, a single, hot tear tracing a path down his cheek. He looked over at the posters on his wall, at the smiling, triumphant face of the symbol of peace. I just wanted to help, he whispered to the empty room, his voice thick with unshed tears. Is that so wrong? I just wanted to be a hero, too. It was a cry of pure, undiluted longing. A desperate, selfless wish from the very core of his soul. A moment of absolute, heart-wrenching emotional honesty. Tick. The sound was so faint, so out of place, that Izuku thought he had imagined it. He lifted his head, his brow furrowed. Tick. It was louder this time. It came from the stone. His eyes widened. He stared at the emerald object, and as he watched, a hairline crack, glowing with a brilliant emerald light, appeared on its surface. Crack. Another crack spiderweb from the first, then another, and another, until the entire surface of the stone was a network of glowing, green fissures. The internal light flared, bathing the room in an ethereal emerald glow that dwarfed the setting sun. The steady, pulsing hum grew into an audible, high-pitched whine. Izuku was frozen in place, a spectator to the impossible. He could only stare, his heart hammering against his ribs, as the object on his desk began to shudder and shake. The cracks widened, and with a final, sharp crack that sounded like shattering crystal, the shell didn't explode, but rather fell away in large, petal-like pieces, revealing what lay within. It was small, no bigger than a house cat, and curled into a tight ball. For a moment, it was perfectly still. Then it unfurled. A slender, serpentine body was covered in scales the exact same shade of deep, lustrous emerald as its former shell. A long, graceful neck supported a head that was a masterpiece of draconic perfection, with two small, backward curving horns of polished obsidian. Thin, membranous wings, the color of new spring leaves, were tucked tightly against its body. It wobbled on four delicate, clawed feet, shaking its head as if to clear it, and then, it opened its eyes. They were the color of molten gold, huge and ancient, and shockingly intelligent. There was no dumb animal look in that gaze. There was awareness. There was wisdom that seemed far too old for a creature that had been born only seconds ago. The tiny dragon blinked, its golden eyes fixing on Izuku, the first thing it had ever seen. As their gazes met, a searing heat erupted on the back of Izuku's right hand. He cried out, a sharp gasp of pain and surprise, and looked down. A symbol was being burned into his skin, not by flame, but by pure, green light. It was a stylized, elegant design, a soaring dragon, its wings spread wide, its tail curled into a graceful loop. The light was blinding, the heat intense but not damaging. When it faded a moment later, the mark remained, a permanent, silver-green tattoo etched into his flesh. The instant the mark settled, the world tilted on its axis. A tidal wave of sensation crashed into his mind. It wasn't sound, not sight, not touch, but something else entirely. It was a voice that didn't use words. Query. Wonder. You. The flood of raw, unfiltered emotion was overwhelming. It was the creature's consciousness, its newborn thoughts and feelings, pouring directly into his own. He could feel its confusion, its curiosity, its first sensations of the cold air on its damp scales. And it could feel him. It felt his shock. His terror. His utter, soul-shaking disbelief. Izuku stumbled back, his legs hitting his chair, and he collapsed into it. He stared at the creature. He stared at the mark on his hand. This wasn't a quirk. This was something else. Something ancient. Something impossible. Something magic. The small dragon took a clumsy, wobbling step forward, then another. It was weak, exhausted from the hatching. It let out a tiny, chirping sound, a soft, melodic query. It stumbled the last few inches across his desk, its golden eyes never leaving his. And then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, the baby dragon nudged his marked hand with its snout, and a new wave of feeling washed over him. This one was different. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a deep, primal, an absolute sense of connection. Mine. Safe. Bonded. Mine. The feeling was reciprocated, an echo in his own soul. He felt a fierce, inexplicable surge of protectiveness for this tiny, impossible being. The dragon, seemingly content with his response, let out a soft, rumbling purr that vibrated through Izuku's hand. It curled up on his desk, right next to his arm, laying its head down and pressing its warm scales against the new, glowing mark on his skin. Its magnificent golden eyes fluttered shut, and its breathing evened out into the quiet rhythm of sleep. Izuku Midoriya sat in the emerald-tinged twilight of his bedroom, his world completely and irrevocably shattered for the second time in 3 days. But this time, it had not been shattered by the crushing weight of reality. This time, it had been shattered by the hatching of a myth. He looked from the sleeping dragon on his desk to the silver-green mark on his hand, a symbol of a destiny he couldn't begin to comprehend. The hollow space in his chest was no longer empty. It was filled with a terrifying, exhilarating, and absolutely impossible new hope. He wasn't quirkless anymore. He was something else. Something more. He was a dragon rider. And his journey had just begun. The silence in the room was a living thing, thick and heavy with the impossible. Izuku sat paralyzed in his chair, his breath caught in his throat, every muscle in his body screaming a mixture of terror and awe. On his desk, nestled against his hand, a dragon slept. A real, living, breathing dragon. The silver-green mark on his skin, the Gedwe Ignatia as the ancient texts would have called it, though he didn't know that name yet, pulsed with a faint, warm light, a constant reminder that this was not a dream. His mind, a precision instrument honed by years of relentless analysis, was completely short-circuited. It tried to categorize, to rationalize, to find a precedent, and failed spectacularly. This creature defied every known law of biology, every quirk registry, every facet of the world he knew. It was a walking, sleeping myth, and it was in his bedroom. The click of the apartment door's lock was like a gunshot in the quiet. Izuku? I'm home! Sorry I took so long. The lines at the market were unbelievable. Panic, cold and sharp, sliced through his stunned paralysis. Mom! He shot to his feet, his mind racing at 1,000 miles per hour. Hide it. He had to hide it. But where? How? It was a living creature. The small dragon stirred at his sudden spike of adrenaline, a wave of his panic washing over their new, inexplicable connection. Its golden eyes opened, blinking slowly. It sent a pulse of sleepy confusion into his mind. Question? Alarm? Quiet. Please, just be quiet. Izuku thought, his own thoughts a frantic scream inside his head. He didn't know if the creature could understand, but he had to try. He looked wildly around the room. Under the bed? Too obvious. The All Might-themed duvet offered little cover. The closet. It had to be the closet. He scooped the creature up in his arms. It was surprisingly dense, heavier than it looked, its scales cool and smooth like polished river stones. It made a small, questioning chirp. Sure, Izuku whispered, his voice trembling. He gently placed the dragon on a pile of old winter clothes in the back of his closet, pushing aside spare uniforms and a collection of hero-themed hoodies. The dragon looked at him with its ancient, intelligent eyes, a sense of Izuku's urgency clearly communicated through their bond. It seemed to understand, curling up and remaining perfectly still. Izuku slid the closet door shut, leaving it open just a crack, and dove back to his desk an instant before his mother knocked and pushed his bedroom door open. There you are, Inko said, a warm smile on her face. Feeling any better after your long sleep? Her eyes scanned the room, and for a heart-stopping second, they lingered on the shattered, petal-like remains of the emerald shell still on his desk. Yeah? Much better, Izuku said, his voice an octave too high. He casually angled his body to block her view of the evidence. Just, doing some reading. For school, Inko's smile softened. It was a relief to see some of his old energy returning, even if he was acting a little strange. Well, that's wonderful, honey. I bought some fresh katsudon ingredients. I thought I'd make your favorite for dinner. That sounds great, Mom. Thanks. She paused in the doorway. Izuku, are you sure you're all right? You seem a little jittery. Just lots of energy, he squeaked, forcing a smile so wide it made his cheeks ache. All that sleep, you know? Recharged my batteries. She seemed to accept it, nodding before she headed towards the kitchen. All right then. Dinner will be ready in about an hour. The moment she was gone, Izuku deflated, leaning on his desk and letting out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding for a solid minute. His heart was trying to beat its way out of his chest. This was untenable. How was he supposed to hide a living dragon in a tiny two-bedroom apartment from his very attentive mother? A soft scratching sound came from the closet, followed by a mental projection that wasn't a word, but a feeling, a sharp, gnawing emptiness. Hunger. Of course. It had just been born. It had to be starving. What did dragons even eat? His mind cycled through fantasy tropes. Livestock, knights, treasure. None of those were helpful. He had to think practically. It was a reptile. A carnivore, most likely. It needed meat. He tiptoed to the kitchen. His mom was humming to herself, chopping vegetables with her back to him. Stealthily, he opened the refrigerator. His eyes scanned the shelves. Eggs, milk, tofu, and yes, a small, vacuum-sealed package of high-quality salmon his mom had bought for a special occasion. Guilt pricked at him, but the feeling of the creature's hunger in his own mind was a powerful motivator. He snatched the package, tucked it into the back of his pants, and crept back to his room like a seasoned spy. He closed his door, locking it for good measure, and opened the closet. The small dragon looked up at him, its golden eyes bright with anticipation. He unwrapped the salmon. The raw, pink flesh looked unappetizing to him, but the dragon's response was a wave of intense, instinctual craving. He offered a piece. The dragon sniffed it delicately, its tiny forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. It looked from the fish to Izuku, a clear question in its gaze. This? For me? Izuku nodded. Yes, eat. The dragon took the piece of fish gently, its small, needle-sharp teeth barely grazing his fingers. It chewed for a moment, then swallowed. But then it shook its head, letting out a small, dissatisfied huff of air. It nudged the remaining fish, projecting another feeling. Wrong. Needs fire? Warmth? Fire. Of course. Dragons and fire. But how was he supposed to cook it? Using the stove was out of the question. He couldn't exactly ask his mom to pan-sear some salmon for his secret, mythical creature. As he pondered this, the dragon focused on the fish again. A low rumbling started in its chest, and its throat began to glow with a faint orange light. Before Izuku could react, a tiny, perfectly controlled puff of flame, no bigger than a candle flicker, shot from its mouth, engulfing the piece of salmon for a split second. The flame vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving the fish lightly seared, a delicious smell now filling the closet. The dragon gobbled up the cooked morsel with clear satisfaction, then looked expectantly at the rest of the raw fillet. Izuku stared, his jaw hanging open. It was real. Fire breathing and everything. He spent the next 10 minutes holding out small pieces of fish while the dragon expertly cooked each one with a miniature burst of flame before eating it. The entire package of salmon disappeared in under 5 minutes. The wave of hunger in his mind was replaced by a warm, purring hum of deep contentment. As the sated creature curled up again, Izuku knew he needed to give it a name. It wasn't an it. It was a he. The consciousness that touched his felt distinctly masculine in its primal energy. Calling him the dragon felt impersonal, clinical. This being was now inextricably linked to him. He deserved a name. He sat at his desk, carefully sweeping the shell fragments into a box he hid under his bed. He opened a fresh, empty notebook. The cover was a plain, unassuming black. He couldn't risk writing this in one of his hero analysis books. On the first page, in his neat, precise handwriting, he wrote the title, Draconic Analysis Writer Studies, No. 1. His hand trembled with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. For the first time since his dream had died on that rooftop, he felt a spark. A real, brilliant spark of purpose. This was a subject no one on Earth had studied for centuries, maybe millennia. And he was the sole researcher. He started with the first and most pressing matter, a name. He pulled up his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He didn't search for cool dragon names. That felt childish. This creature was majestic, ancient. It needed a name with weight, with history. He searched for Old English, Norse, and Proto-Germanic words. Words for power, emerald, sky, noble. He scrolled through lists, murmuring names under his breath. Jorman. Fafnir. Ryu. No. Then he found it. Ethel. An Old English word. It meant noble. It felt right. It clicked into place in his mind with the same sense of profound certainty he'd felt when he first touched the egg. He turned to the closet, where the dragon was watching him, its head cocked. Izuku focused, trying to push the name, the concept of the name, across their bond. He pictured the word, projected the feeling of nobility, of honor, that it evoked. Ethel? A powerful wave of affirmation surged back at him, warm and bright as the sun. It was a feeling of pride, of acceptance. The dragon, Ethel, pushed himself to his feet, stretched his wings for the first time, and let out a soft, melodic cry that sounded like chiming bells. It was a declaration. I am Ethel. Izuku grinned, a real, genuine grin that reached his eyes. Ethel, he whispered. I'm Izuku. Izuku. The name echoed back in his mind, imbued with a sense of loyalty and belonging that made his heart ache. This was real. This was happening. He had a friend. A secret. A bond. He spent the rest of the night filling the first few pages of his new notebook with frantic, detailed notes. Entry 1. Subject identified as a dragon, hatched from a geode-like egg of unknown origin found at the old Kitayama shrine. Subject is male. Scales are emerald green, eyes are gold. Possesses high intelligence, capable of complex nonverbal, telepathic communication. Entry 2. Naming. Subject responded positively to the name Ethel, Old English, noble. Bond seems to strengthen with mutual recognition. Communication is primarily emotional and conceptual, but with a surprising degree of clarity. It's like feeling a thought instead of hearing it. Entry 3. Diet consists of meat, preferably cooked. Ethel is capable of self-cooking food with controlled bursts of flame. Minimum flame temperature appears high enough to sear fish instantly. Need to acquire more food. Stealthily. Mom's grocery budget is not prepared for a growing dragon. Entry 4. The mark. A silver-green symbol appeared on my right hand upon hatching. It feels like the focal point of our telepathic bond. It occasionally glows and feels warm, especially during moments of strong emotion or direct communication. It is the source of other changes. That last part gave him pause. The changes had been subtle at first, easy to dismiss. But they were becoming undeniable. The day after Ethel hatched, Izuku had been listening to music through his headphones when he'd clearly heard his mother, who was downstairs in the kitchen, whisper to herself about needing to buy more dashi. He'd taken off his headphones, baffled, but the apartment had been silent. Later that day, he'd been putting away his 5-kilogram All Might-themed dumbbell when his hand had slipped. He'd instinctively grabbed it out of the air, his fingers clenching tight. When he'd put it down, he saw 5 distinct dents in the solid metal where his fingertips had been. He'd stared at his hand, then at the dumbbell, his mind refusing to process what it was seeing. He wasn't strong enough to do that. He'd never been strong enough to do that. Now he knew. It was the bond. A symbiotic connection. Ethel's nascent draconic vitality was bleeding over into him, channeled through the glowing mark on his hand. He was becoming faster, stronger, his senses sharpening to a preternatural degree. He wasn't just Izuku anymore. He was one half of a whole. Hypothesis, he wrote, his pen scratching furiously. The writer's bond is symbiotic. As Ethel grows stronger, so do I. It is not a quirk. It is something else. Something ancient. A biological and magical linkage that enhances the writer's physical capabilities to mirror, on a smaller scale, the dragon's own. The following weeks became a masterclass in secrecy and logistics. Ethel's growth rate was, to put it mildly, terrifying. Within the first week, he went from the size of a house cat to the size of a beagle. By the end of the second week, he was as large as a full-grown Labrador, his wingspan now wide enough to brush both sides of the closet. His appetite grew proportionally. Izuku began spending his entire allowance on cheap cuts of meat from the butcher, smuggling them home in his backpack and hiding them in a small cooler he kept buried under his laundry. Their communication deepened with every passing day. Simple emotions evolved into complex strings of images and intentions. When Ethel was thirsty, Izuku would see a mental image of a cool, clear stream. When Ethel was bored, Izuku would be flooded with the feeling of being caged, accompanied by a vivid mental picture of an open sky. Izuku, in turn, learned to project his own thoughts. He showed Ethel images from his hero notebooks, explaining the concepts of heroes and villains. Ethel responded with a pure, simple draconic morality, a fierce protectiveness for the innocent, hatchlings, and a burning, predatory disdain for those who would cause harm, bad hunters. The closet was becoming a prison. Izuku could feel Ethel's frustration and restlessness as a constant, thrumming agitation in the back of his own mind. The dragon was born to fly, to soar, to feel the wind under his wings. Being confined to a dark, cramped space was torture. His long, serpentine tail would thump restlessly against the wall, a sound Izuku constantly had to explain away as just moving some boxes around. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday night, 3 weeks after the hatching. Ethel was now easily the size of a small deer, his head brushing the ceiling of the closet when he stood up. Izuku was at his desk, trying to do his homework, but the suffocating feeling of Ethel's confinement was making it impossible to concentrate. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the closet. Izuku shot up, his heart leaping into his throat. He threw the door open. Ethel had shifted in his sleep, and his tail had swiped out, knocking over a stack of old board games and breaking a cheap plastic lamp Izuku had stored in there. "Ethel, you have to be more careful!" Izuku hissed, his own voice laced with the panic he felt from the dragon. Before he could do anything else, his mother's voice came from the hallway. "Izuku? What was that noise? Is everything all right?" "It's nothing, Mom!" he called out, his voice cracking. He frantically tried to push Ethel further back into the closet, but he was too big, too heavy. Ethel, sensing Inko's approach, panicked. He felt trapped. A low, guttural growl, a sound far too deep and threatening to come from any normal animal, rumbled in his chest. Threat. Danger. Close. Ethel projected, his primal instincts flaring. "No, Ethel, she's not a threat. She's my mother. Calm down," Izuku pleaded, pushing his own feelings of safety and love for his mother across the bond. The doorknob began to turn. In a feat of desperation fueled by his enhanced strength, Izuku slammed his shoulder against the closet door, forcing it shut just as his bedroom door swung open. He stood with his back pressed against the closet, breathing heavily, trying to look casual. Inko stood there, a worried expression on her face. "Honey, what's going on? What was that growling sound?" "Growling?" Izuku laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "That was my stomach. Yeah, super hungry. Didn't have a big lunch. You know how it is." He rubbed his stomach for emphasis, praying she would buy it. The closet door vibrated behind him as Ethel shifted again. Inko's eyes narrowed. She wasn't stupid. She saw the sweat on his brow, the frantic look in his eyes, the way he was barricading his closet door. She was a mother. She knew when her son was hiding something. "Izuku," she said, her voice soft but firm. "What's in the closet?" His mind went blank. He had no more excuses. This was it. The secret was out. He would have to explain that he was hiding a mythical, fire-breathing creature that was growing at an exponential rate. They'd probably take Ethel away. Dissect him. The thought sent a jolt of pure terror through him, which in turn caused Ethel to growl again, louder this time. Just as Inko took a step forward, Izuku's phone buzzed in his pocket. He seized the opportunity. "Oh! A text? From school!" he blurted out, pulling it from his pocket. "It's about the big group project. I totally forgot. I have to go meet up with my group. Right now." He didn't wait for a response. He grabbed his backpack, the one he now kept perpetually packed with a tarp and a few water bottles for Ethel, and scrambled past his bewildered mother. "Izuku, wait! It's late. Where are you going?" "The library. Dagoba Municipal Beach. They're the same place," he yelled nonsensically as he jammed his feet into his red shoes and bolted out the front door, slamming it behind him. He stood in the hallway, his back against the door, his lungs burning. He could feel Ethel's panic and confusion, and his mother's bewildered worry. He had to get Ethel out. Not just for a night, but for good. The apartment was no longer an option. His mind raced, sifting through locations. He needed somewhere big, abandoned, and close. Somewhere people actively avoided. And then, the perfect, ironic solution hit him. Dagoba Municipal Beach. The same trash heap of a coastline where he'd first met a deflated All Might. The place where his dream had been crushed. It was a local disgrace, a sprawling illegal dumping ground that no one ever visited, especially not at night. It was perfect, full of mountains of junk to use as cover, the open sea on one side, and isolated from residential areas. The plan that formed in his mind was reckless, insane, and absolutely necessary. He waited 2 hours, hiding in a nearby park until he was sure his mother had gone to bed. He snuck back to the apartment complex, his enhanced senses on high alert. He could hear the faint sound of the television from his own apartment, the hum of refrigerators from his neighbors. He climbed the fire escape, his new strength making it an effortless ascent, and slipped in through his bedroom window, which he'd left unlocked. The room was empty. A note on his desk from his mom told him to be safe and text her when he was done. Guilt twisted in his gut, but he pushed it down. He opened the closet. Ethel was coiled tightly, a miserable, cramped posture. A wave of immense relief and happiness washed over Izuku as the dragon saw him. "You came back." "Of course I did," Izuku sent back, his own emotions a mix of apology and determination. "We're leaving. It's not safe here anymore. We're going somewhere you can stretch your wings." The idea of stretching his wings, even metaphorically, sent a thrill of excitement through Ethel. Getting a dragon the size of a small horse out of a second-story window was not a quiet or easy process. It involved a lot of careful maneuvering, whispered instructions, and Izuku using his surprising strength to guide Ethel's descent. They finally landed in the alley behind the building with a soft thud. The city at night was a daunting landscape of light and shadow. Izuku pulled the hood of his sweatshirt up, motioning for Ethel to stay low. The journey to Dagoba Beach was a tense, nerve-wracking crawl through back alleys and shadowed parks. Ethel moved with an unnerving, predatory silence, his draconic instincts perfectly suited for stealth. But every passing car, every distant siren, sent a fresh jolt of fear through Izuku. Finally, they reached the retaining wall that separated the city from the blighted coastline. Below them lay a breathtaking vista of urban decay. Mountains of rusted appliances, broken furniture, and discarded plastics stretched down to the shoreline, lit by the eerie glow of the city lights. The air smelled of salt, rust, and rot. To anyone else, it would have been a depressing eyesore. To Ethel, it was freedom. Izuku led him down a crumbling set of concrete stairs to the sand. The moment his claws touched the open ground, Ethel let out a low, rumbling sound of pure joy. He bounded forward, weaving through the junk piles, his powerful muscles finally allowed to work. He stretched his massive wings, the leathery membrane catching the moonlight. They were magnificent, easily spanning 4 meters from tip to tip. He couldn't fly yet, he was still too young, his flight muscles not fully developed, but the instinct was there. He leaped onto a tall pile of discarded cars, his claws finding easy purchase on the rusted metal, and surveyed his new, temporary kingdom. Izuku watched him, a wide, relieved smile on his face. The guilt, the fear, the constant, suffocating tension of the past 3 weeks finally began to recede. Here, in this forgotten wasteland, they were safe. Here they could train. He looked from his magnificent, impossible friend to the glowing city skyline in the distance. The world of heroes and villains, the world that had told him he was worthless, felt a million miles away. He had a new world now, a secret world shared with a dragon. He climbed up the pile of junk to join Ethel. The dragon turned and nudged him gently, a warm puff of air ruffling his hair. Their minds touched, not with words or images, but with a simple, shared feeling of profound contentment and unwavering loyalty. Together, Ethel projected, the thought as clear as a star in the night sky. Izuku reached out, placing his marked hand on Ethel's warm, scaled neck. "Yeah," he whispered, his voice filled with a hope he thought he'd never feel again. Together, the moon, a perfect silver disk in the stardusted sky, cast long, distorted shadows across the mountains of refuse at Dagoba Municipal Beach. This landscape of decay had become Izuku Midoriya's sanctuary, his training ground, his entire world outside of the monotonous cycle of school and carefully constructed lies to his mother. For the past month, his life had been a study in contrasts, a quiet, unremarkable student by day, and a secret keeper, a researcher, and the world's first dragon tamer in centuries by night. Exhaustion was a constant, leaden weight in his bones. He survived his classes on a cocktail of cheap energy drinks and sheer willpower, his mind often drifting from lectures on pre-quirk history to his own living, breathing piece of it. His notebooks had multiplied, alongside the now titled Draconic Analysis Rider Studies. There were new volumes. Applied Draconic Aerodynamics, Potential Symbiotic Abilities, and a detailed log of Ethel's diet and rapid growth. And Ethel's growth was nothing short of miraculous. The dragon who had once fit in his closet was now the size of a small car, his emerald scales shimmering like polished jewels under the moonlight. His wings, once delicate and membranous, were now thick sheets of muscle and leathery skin, each one as long as a city bus. His presence was an undeniable force of nature, a coiled spring of immense power that made the very air around him hum. Their training had become a rigorous routine. Izuku, using his analytical mind, had devised a series of exercises based on zoology and theoretical physics. They worked on strengthening Ethel's wings with powerful, controlled beats that sent cyclones of sand and debris swirling across the beach. They practiced short, gliding leaps from the tallest junk piles, Izuku clinging to the base of Ethel's neck, his heart hammering with a mixture of terror and glee. "Angle your wings at 17 degrees on the descent. It will maximize lift and reduce strain." Izuku would project, his thought a complex diagram of airflow and pressure dynamics. Ethel would respond with a wave of amused compliance, adjusting his wings with a precision that was pure instinct. "Show off," the dragon would tease, his mental voice now a rich, resonant baritone in Izuku's mind. Their bond had deepened into a seamless river of shared consciousness. Izuku no longer just felt Ethel's base emotions, he understood his complex thoughts, his draconic humor, his deep, instinctual wisdom. He knew, without Ethel having to project it, that the dragon's greatest frustration was his connection to the ground. This frustration had become a constant, primal thrum in the back of Izuku's own mind. It was a yearning for the sky, a deep, cellular need to be airborne that was so powerful it manifested in Izuku's own dreams. He would dream of soaring through endless, star-filled nights, the wind a roaring symphony in his ears, the world a beautiful, glittering tapestry below. He would wake with the phantom sensation of wind on his face, and a profound sense of loss. It was Ethel's desire, the fundamental truth of his being, echoing within his own soul. Tonight that thrum was a deafening roar. A storm was rolling in off the coast, and the change in atmospheric pressure seemed to agitate Ethel. He was restless, pacing the length of the beach, his massive wings unfurling and snapping shut with sharp cracks of displaced air. His golden eyes were fixed on the churning, dark clouds that gathered on the horizon. "The sky calls, Izuku," Ethel sent, his thought a low, rumbling plea. "The currents are strong. They will lift us." Izuku shivered, pulling his hoodie tighter. He felt it too. The pull of the open sky was a physical ache in his chest. "We're not ready, Ethel," he said aloud, his voice nearly lost in the rising wind. He projected his reasoning, a cascade of data points and cautionary notes. "Your flight muscles aren't at peak density. Our synchronized balance is only at 80% during the glides. It's too risky." Ethel stopped his pacing and turned his magnificent head to look at him. His golden eyes seemed to glow with an inner fire. "You think too much with your mind, little rider. Some things are not meant to be calculated. They are meant to be felt. The sky is not a problem to be solved. It is a home to be returned to." He took a step closer, lowering his head until his snout was level with Izuku's chest. The warmth of his breath was a comfort against the cold sea air. "Trust me. Trust our bond." Before Izuku could argue, Ethel nudged him, a firm but gentle push towards the makeshift saddle and harness system he had painstakingly crafted from old leather car seats and salvaged cargo straps. It was a crude but functional design, meant to keep him anchored during their increasingly daring glides. A surge of pure, undiluted draconic instinct washed over Izuku, a wave of certainty so powerful it drowned his own meticulous caution. It was Ethel's will, a force as undeniable as gravity. This was happening, tonight. Now, his hands trembling, Izuku checked the straps, pulling them tight. He climbed onto Ethel's back, his usual spot just behind the great dragon's neck where a natural groove between two powerful shoulder blades offered a semblance of stability. He wrapped his hands around a thick, bony ridge that ran down Ethel's spine, his knuckles white. "Ready?" Izuku projected, his thought a tight ball of sheer terror. Ethel's response was not a thought, but a feeling, a vast, soaring, triumphant joy that was utterly infectious. He didn't wait for another signal. With a roar that challenged the coming thunder, Ethel launched himself forward. He bounded across the sand, his powerful legs eating up the distance in massive leaps. The junk piles became a blur. Izuku held on for dear life, the jarring impacts sending shocks up his spine. They were heading for the largest mountain of refuse on the beach, a 30-meter-high monstrosity of compressed cars and rusted shipping containers they had nicknamed the Heap. They hit the base of it not with a crash, but with a fluid, powerful scramble, Ethel's claws finding purchase in the twisted metal, his legs driving them upward. And then, they were at the summit. For a breathtaking instant, they were silhouetted against the moon, the wind whipping around them in a frenzy. And then Ethel leaped. For one heart-stopping second, they fell. Izuku's stomach shot into his throat, a strangled cry dying on his lips. The dark, churning ocean rushed up to meet them. Then, with a sound like a thunderclap, Ethel's wings caught the air. The fall arrested with a jolt that nearly tore Izuku from his saddle. They didn't just glide, they climbed. Ethel gave a powerful downstroke, then another, and another, each beat of his colossal wings a seismic event that propelled them higher and higher. The force of the wind was a physical blow, tearing at Izuku's clothes, trying to rip the air from his lungs. He flattened himself against Ethel's neck, squeezing his eyes shut against the terrifying, exhilarating rush. "Izuku! Look!" He forced his eyes open. And the world fell away. Dagobah Beach, his prison and his sanctuary, was a tiny, insignificant patch of darkness below. The city of Mizutifa, a place that had seemed so vast and intimidating his entire life, was now a breathtaking carpet of fallen stars, a glittering network of gold and white light that stretched to the horizon. The skyscrapers he had once craned his neck to see were now just tiny, glittering needles pointing up at them. They were above it all. The wind was no longer an enemy but a tangible current, a river of air that Ethel rode with an instinctual grace that defied his immense size. They banked, and Izuku leaned with him, the city lights tilting at a dizzying angle. A laugh, wild and breathless, escaped his lips. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his gut, but it was being rapidly consumed by an emotion he had never felt before, a sense of absolute, untethered freedom. "This is what you were born for," Izuku sent, his awe a tangible thing. "We were born for," Ethel corrected, his own ecstasy a roaring bonfire in their shared mindscape. They climbed higher, punching through the lower layer of storm clouds into a calm, surreal world above. Below them was a roiling sea of white and gray vapor, lit from within by the city's glow. Above, the stars were a brilliant, blazing canopy, unobscured by light pollution, more vivid and numerous than Izuku had ever imagined. The moon was so close he felt like he could reach out and touch its pockmarked surface. This was a hero's view. This was the perspective of All Might as he leaped from building to building. It was the vantage point of a guardian, a protector watching over a sleeping city. For the first time, Izuku didn't feel like a quirkless failure who had stumbled upon a miracle. He felt like a part of that miracle. He was the rider. This was his sky. This was his purpose. The thought was so clear, so powerful, it felt like a vow. They flew for what felt like hours, a silent, impossible shadow gliding through the heavens. But their joyous exploration was cut short by a sudden, jarring new sensation through their bond. It was a spike of alarm from Ethel, whose senses were far sharper than Izuku's. Smoke, Ethel sent, the thought sharp and acrid. And something else. Something foul. The scent of bad hunters. Izuku's enhanced senses kicked in a moment later. He could smell it now, even at this altitude, the unmistakable, chemical stench of a massive fire. He leaned over, peering down through a break in the clouds. In the industrial district near the port, a pillar of angry, orange light was clawing its way into the night sky, churning thick, black smoke that was beginning to stain their sea of clouds. A warehouse, a massive one. And it was burning. His heart clenched. People could be in there. He instinctively looked for the telltale flashing lights of emergency services, the familiar sight of pro-heroes rushing to the scene. But there was nothing, just the fire, growing larger and more ferocious by the second. Why isn't anyone responding? He wondered. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers clumsy with cold and adrenaline. He managed to pull up a live hero news feed. His blood ran cold. The headline was a stark, flashing banner. Coordinated villain attack! League of Villains affiliates strike multiple locations in downtown Mizutifa. It was a diversion. A large-scale, organized attack designed to draw every available hero to the city center, leaving the periphery vulnerable. That warehouse fire wasn't an accident. It was an opportunity, and people were going to die. The old Izuku would have been helpless, a spectator watching a tragedy unfold on a screen. The old Izuku would have prayed for a hero to show up, but he wasn't the old Izuku. He was sitting on the back of a dragon. We have to do something, he projected, his thought a steel blade of resolve. Ethel didn't need convincing. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound of pure, predatory fury directed at the scene below. They are trapping the hatchlings. We will not allow it. They dove. The descent was a controlled fall, a terrifying plummet that stole Izuku's breath all over again. The wind shrieked past them as they plunged back through the cloud layer, emerging into the smoke-choked air above the industrial district. The scene below was chaos. The warehouse, a massive corrugated metal structure, was engulfed in flames along its eastern wall. The fire was spreading with unnatural speed, fueled by some kind of thick, black, viscous substance that clung to the walls and burned with a greasy, chemical fury. At the main entrance, a group of 5 figures were locked in a firefight with a handful of outmatched security guards. From his vantage point, Izuku's analytical mind took over, processing the scene with cold, detached clarity. Threat assessment: 5 villains. Quirk analysis required. Objective: rescue, not engagement. There are civilians trapped. The security guards are pinned down. The fire is the primary threat, likely caused or accelerated by a quirk. He directed Ethel to circle higher, keeping them hidden in the thickest part of the smoke plume. He could see the villains more clearly now. One was a large, brutish man who was extruding the thick, black tar-like substance from his hands, feeding the flames. Another was a wiry woman who could generate sparks from her fingertips, igniting the tar. A third had a quirk that let him reshape metal, and he was twisting the warehouse doors shut, trapping people inside. The other two were providing covering fire with what looked like illegal, high-powered rifles. Smugglers. Or arms dealers. He could also see the victims. A dozen warehouse workers and the security guards were trapped between the burning building and the villains' assault. They were cornered, with nowhere to run. A cold, hard rage settled in Izuku's heart. These weren't grand, theatrical villains. They were just cruel, greedy people willing to burn others alive for a profit. All Might's words echoed in his head. You need to be realistic. The pro-heroes scolding after the sludge villain incident. You're just a quirkless kid, he gritted his teeth. Not anymore. Ethel, I have a plan, Izuku projected, sending a rapid-fire sequence of images and commands. We attack the fire first. Create a distraction and an opening. Then we make an escape route. We do not engage the villains directly. We save the people and we disappear. Understood? Ethel sent back a powerful wave of affirmation. The hunt is on. They came out of the smoke like a phantom from a nightmare. One moment, the sky was filled with nothing but smoke and ash. The next, a monstrous, winged shadow blotted out the moon. For the people on the ground, it was an apparition, a thing of myth and madness. They could only stare, mouths agape, as the creature descended. Now, Ethel! Full power! Wing vortex! Ethel angled his body, and with a roar that shattered the remaining windows of the warehouse, he beat his wings in a furious, downward vortex. It wasn't a gentle breeze, it was a localized hurricane, a solid wall of air, moving at over 150 kilometers per hour, slammed into the eastern wall of the warehouse. The effect was instantaneous. The massive, tar-fueled flames, starved of oxygen and blasted by the sheer force, were snuffed out as if they were candle flickers. The gust of wind was so powerful it tore sheets of metal from the warehouse frame and sent the villains stumbling. The tar quirk user was knocked flat on his back, his stream of fuel cut off. The sudden, shocking change in the battlefield provided the opening the security guards needed. They laid down suppressive fire, forcing the disoriented villains to take cover. But Izuku wasn't finished. The north wall. It's structurally weaker. Get them an exit. Ethel banked sharply, a maneuver that would have been impossible for any man-made aircraft. He swooped towards the northern face of the building, a solid wall of metal that was now beginning to buckle from the intense heat inside. The trapped workers were huddled near it, but they had no way through. Use your claws. Rip it open. Ethel descended, his flight silent and predatory now. He hit the wall with the force of a wrecking ball. His massive, obsidian claws, harder than steel, screeched against the corrugated metal. He hooked them into the wall and pulled. With a deafening groan of protesting metal, a huge section of the warehouse wall tore open like a tin can. Hot air and smoke billowed out, but so did the trapped workers, who scrambled through the new opening, their faces a mixture of terror and disbelief. From their cover, the villains saw what was happening. The spark quirk woman recovered first, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and rage. What the hell is that thing? Shoot it down! Rifle fire erupted, bullets pinging harmlessly off Ethel's emerald scales. He let out an annoyed hiss, the sound like a steam pipe rupturing. They're shooting at us. We need to go. Now! Izuku urged, his heart pounding. The plan was working, but they had lingered too long. In the distance, he could hear the first faint, approaching wail of sirens. The real heroes were on their way. Ethel needed no more encouragement. With another powerful beat of his wings, he launched himself back into the sky, climbing rapidly towards the safety of the smoke and clouds. The last thing the people on the ground saw was the creature's immense, serpentine tail whipping through the smoke as it vanished into the night, leaving behind a stunned silence broken only by the crackling of the remaining fire and the approaching sirens. One of the younger warehouse workers, a kid no older than Izuku, fumbled with his phone, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He had been recording. The footage was blurry, chaotic, mostly pointed at the ground, but for 3 world-changing seconds he had captured it. A clear shot of a massive, emerald green dragon, its wings like thunderclouds, tearing a hole in the side of the building, and for a fraction of a second, a small, hooded figure was visible on its back. They landed back on Dagobah Beach, their arrival a soft thud on the sand that was a stark contrast to their chaotic departure. Adrenaline coursed through Izuku's veins like lightning. He slid off Ethel's back, his legs trembling so badly he almost collapsed. He was shaking, drenched in a cold sweat, and his ears were ringing. He had done it. He hadn't run in with a foolish, suicidal charge. He had used his mind. He had analyzed the situation, formulated a plan, and executed it with a partner who trusted him implicitly. They had saved over a dozen people. They had been a hero. Ethel nudged him, a wave of fierce, proprietary pride washing over their bond. Good hunt, my rider. We protected the hatchlings. Izuku looked up at his magnificent, impossible friend, and for the first time, he saw not just a dragon, but a hero in his own right. A creature of immense power guided by a noble, protective spirit. He leaned against Ethel's warm, scaled leg, the sheer emotional and physical exhaustion of the night hitting him all at once. He looked back towards the distant city lights, where the flashing red and blue of emergency vehicles now converged on the port. He was outside of that world. He wasn't a licensed pro. He wasn't a hero student. He was a vigilante. An unknown. A myth. The thought should have been terrifying, but instead, it was liberating. He didn't need a license or public approval to do what was right. He just needed his courage, his mind, and his friend. His phone buzzed. A news alert. He opened it, his thumbs shaking. The headline read, "Mysterious winged creature intervenes in warehouse attack. Eyewitnesses claim it was a dragon." Below it was a link to a video, already going viral. Izuku watched the shaky, 3-second clip. The monstrous shadow. The impossible beast of legend. The tiny, fleeting glimpse of a figure on its back. The comments section was exploding. Obviously a CGI hoax. It's a new hero with a transformation quirk. My cousin's friend works at the port. He says it was real. It saved his life. Looks like a flying cryptid to me. Mizutifa's own Mothman. Forget cryptid. That was a vigilante. A new one. A new urban legend had just been born. The legend of a winged savior, a phantom of the night. Izuku looked from the phone screen to Ethel, who was gazing out at the ocean, a silent, powerful sentinel under the moon. He hadn't inherited one for all. He hadn't gotten into UA High. His path was darker, more dangerous, and far more lonely than the one he had dreamed of. But as he stood there, on the shores of a forgotten beach, beside a living myth that was bonded to his very soul, Izuku Midoriya felt more like a hero than he ever had in his life. Toshinori Yagi, known to the world as the indomitable All Might, sat in a Spartan office that smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. The room was little more than a closet at the Mizutifa police precinct, a private space granted to him for liaising with his oldest friend, Detective Naomasa Tsukachi. In this skeletal form, the aches in his body were a constant, grim chorus. His ruined side throbbed with a phantom pain that was a permanent souvenir from his battle with All for One, a battle that had cost him his stomach and most of his respiratory system. He was tired. The coordinated villain attack from the previous night had stretched the city's hero resources to their breaking point. He had spent hours in his muscle form, a draining and painful endeavor, putting out metaphorical and literal fires, his signature smile feeling more like a rictus of agony than a symbol of hope. On the desk in front of him was a tablet displaying a dozen different incident reports. But he wasn't reading them. His attention was fixed on one particular file, flagged as Anomalous Vigilante Activity, Level 3 Inquiry. A dragon, Toshi, Naomasa said, his voice flat with the weary disbelief of a man who had seen everything. He took a long sip of his coffee, his truth quirk a passive, useless thing in the face of such an outlandish claim. His quirk could tell him if a person was lying, but it couldn't make the truth any less insane. Not a metaphorical dragon. Not a guy with a dragon-like quirk. The preliminary witness statements from the port warehouse incident are unanimous. They saw a literal, city bus-sized, emerald green dragon. Toshinori let out a dry, wheezing cough. Hysteria, Neo Mesa. They were under attack, there was a fire, smoke, people see things in the chaos. I'd agree with you, the detective said, leaning forward and swiping the tablet's screen. A blurry, shaky video began to play. The now infamous 3-second clip. If it weren't for this, and the physical evidence, Toshinori watched the video for the 10th time. The impossible silhouette against the smoke-filled sky. The sheer scale of the creature, the terrifying grace of its movement, and the tiny, fleeting figure on its back. His breath hitched. It was just a smudge of color, a flicker of motion, but he saw a flash of dark green that was achingly familiar. The physical evidence? He asked, his voice tighter than before. Neo Mesa slid a small, sealed evidence bag across the desk. Inside, nestled on a bed of white cotton, was a single scale. It was the size of Toshinori's palm, a perfect, teardrop shape of deepest emerald green, veined with what looked like shimmering gold. It seemed to catch the harsh fluorescent light of the office and drink it in, glowing with a soft, internal luminescence. Forensics is having a meltdown, Neo Mesa continued. The material composition matches nothing in any known database. It's not organic in the way we understand it. It's harder than titanium alloy but has the flexibility of a polymer. No DNA could be extracted. It's a biological and metallurgical impossibility. One of the lab techs started calling it fantasy metal. Toshinori picked up the bag, his long, bony fingers tracing the outline of the scale. A cold dread, heavy and familiar, began to seep into his bones. This was something other, something that existed outside the neat, chaotic framework of quirks. A power from a different age, and the location, he murmured, more to himself than to the detective. The industrial port is less than a kilometer from Dagoba Municipal Beach. Neo Mesa finished for him, his gaze sharp and knowing. The connection clicked into place with the force of a physical blow. The beach where he had crushed a young boy's dream. A boy with bright, determined eyes and a shock of unruly green hair. A boy who had, despite his quirklessness, charged into mortal danger to save a friend. A boy whose reckless, desperate heroism had both infuriated and deeply impressed him. Young Midoriya. The dread solidified into a heavy stone in his gut. Could it be? Could that earnest, powerless boy be connected to this impossibility? The thought was absurd, and yet, the flash of green in the video, the proximity to the beach, the sheer, unadulterated heroism of the act itself, saving trapped people without engaging the villains, a rescue-focused operation, it all painted a picture that was becoming terrifyingly clear. That boy hadn't wanted to fight villains, he had wanted to save people. It was his defining, singular motivation. Toshi? Neo Mesa asked, his voice laced with concern. You look like you've seen a ghost. I may have created one, Toshinori whispered, his eyes distant. He stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the linoleum floor. I need to look into this myself. Alone, be careful, the detective warned. Whatever that thing is, it tore through a reinforced steel warehouse wall like it was wet paper. It's a force of nature. If it's hostile, I don't think it is, Toshinori said, a strange certainty in his voice. He looked down at the scale, then back at the frozen image of the tiny rider on the screen. Hostile forces didn't prioritize creating escape routes for trapped civilians. That was the work of a hero. A reckless, unsanctioned, and utterly terrifying hero. Night fell, and with it, a bone-chilling mist rolled in from the sea, blanketing Dagoba Beach in a spectral, gray shroud. Toshinori Yagi, dressed in a simple dark tracksuit, moved through the mountains of junk with a practiced silence. The place was a monument to his own failure, both his failure to inspire society to take care of its own messes, and his more personal failure on that day he told a desperate boy to give up. He didn't come in his muscle form. All Might would attract attention. All Might was a symbol, a target. Yagi Toshinori was just a walking skeleton, a ghost in the fog, and that was exactly what he needed to be. His heightened senses, a residual gift from One for All, picked up the sounds of the beach, the rhythmic crash of waves, the groan of rusting metal, and something else. A low, resonant hum. A thrum of immense, sleeping power that made the fillings in his teeth ache. It was centered deeper within the junkyard. He followed the sensation, his steps making no sound on the damp sand. He scaled a precariously balanced pile of discarded appliances, his gaunt frame surprisingly agile. From the top, he peered down into a makeshift clearing, a sort of amphitheater formed by several towering heaps of compressed cars. And then he saw it. The breath caught in his throat, a painful, wheezing thing. The stories, the video, the impossible scale, none of it had prepared him for the reality. The dragon was magnificent. Terrifying. Real. It was curled up, asleep, its massive body rising and falling with each deep, slow breath. Puffs of faint gray smoke curled from its nostrils, smelling faintly of ozone and hot stone. Its emerald scales seemed to absorb the faint moonlight, each one a polished gem in a suit of divine armor. It was larger than the reports had suggested, easily the size of a tractor-trailer, a creature of myth and legend slumbering amidst the detritus of the modern world. But it was the sight next to the beast that truly stopped Toshinori's heart. There, leaning against the dragon's massive foreleg, was a small, green-haired boy, fast asleep. He had a notebook open on his lap, a pen still clutched in his hand. His face, so open and earnest, was peaceful in sleep. It was him. Izuku Midoriya. For a long moment, Toshinori could only stare, his mind struggling to reconcile the two images, the quirkless, tear-streaked boy on the rooftop, and the serene young man sleeping safely in the embrace of a monster from humanity's forgotten nightmares. As he watched, the boy stirred. He sat up, stretching with a lithe, athletic grace that he hadn't possessed a few months ago. He was leaner, his muscles more defined under his simple t-shirt. He stood up and began to move through a series of complex stretches and exercises. He was faster than a normal person should be, his movements fluid and powerful. He leaped from a rusted car to a pile of tires 10 feet away, landing as silently as a cat. He picked up a discarded engine block, an object that had to weigh at least 200 kilograms, and lifted it with a visible but manageable strain. Toshinori's eyes widened. This is not the work of training alone. This was a physical enhancement. A transference of power. The boy wasn't just the dragon's keeper. They were connected. Bonded. The boy, young Midoriya, finished his warm-up and turned to the sleeping dragon. He placed a hand on its massive snout. "Ethel," he said softly, his voice full of a gentle affection that was staggering in its sincerity. "Time to wake up. We have work to do." The dragon's golden eyes, each one the size of a dinner plate, slid open. There was no animalistic stupor in that gaze. There was only ancient, formidable intelligence. The dragon let out a low, rumbling purr, a sound that vibrated through the very ground, and nudged the boy affectionately. Toshinori knew he had seen enough. The secret was too big, the potential for disaster too immense. He had to intervene. He took a quiet step down from his perch. It was a mistake. His foot displaced a loose piece of scrap metal, which clattered down the side of the junk pile with a series of loud, sharp clangs. The reaction was instantaneous. Ethel's head snapped up, his purr turning into a deep, guttural growl that was the sound of an impending earthquake. In a movement too fast for a creature of his size, he uncoiled, placing his immense body between Izuku and the source of the noise. Smoke, thick and black now, billowed from his nostrils, and the ridges along his spine began to glow with a faint, orange light. He was a fortress of scale and muscle, a living weapon preparing to strike. Izuku, for his part, had dropped into a low, defensive crouch, his head whipping around, his eyes wide with alarm. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice sharp with adrenaline. Toshinori knew there was no point in hiding any longer. He stepped out from behind the junk pile, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Easy now," he said, his voice a low, calm rasp. Izuku's face went through a rapid series of emotions, confusion, recognition, and then pure, stark terror. His skin paled to a ghostly white, and his eyes were as wide as saucers. "All might," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Toshinori saw the boy's panic and realized his mistake. To this boy, he wasn't just a hero. He was the man who had crushed his dreams and then witnessed his reckless vigilantism with the sludge villain. And now he was here, having discovered his even bigger, more illegal secret. The boy thought he was here to arrest him, to take his friend away. Threat confirmed, Ethel's mind seemed to scream, though Toshinori couldn't hear the telepathic shout. The dragon lowered his head, his massive jaw opening slightly to reveal rows of dagger-like teeth. A low, ominous orange glow began to build deep within his throat. "No, wait!" Izuku yelled, throwing himself in front of Ethel's snout, his small body a comical but fiercely determined shield. He pressed his hands against the dragon's scales. "He's not a threat! Ethel, no! He's a hero! He's the best hero!" The raw, unwavering faith in the boy's voice, even in the face of his own terror, struck Toshinori harder than any physical blow. He held the boy's terrified gaze. "Young Midoriya," he said, his voice soft but firm, cutting through the tension. "We need to talk." The command, spoken with the quiet authority of the symbol of peace, seemed to break the spell. Izuku, trembling, managed to calm his draconic guardian. He projected a torrent of calming thoughts and feelings through their bond, showing Ethel images of All Might's heroism, assuring him that this man was a protector, not a threat. Slowly, agonizingly, the glow in Ethel's throat faded. The smoke from his nostrils thinned. But his golden eyes, filled with a wary, ancient intelligence, never left Toshinori. Izuku finally turned back to face him, his entire body trembling. He looked like a cornered animal, ready to bolt. I can explain. I think you'd better," Toshinori said, his expression unreadable as he slowly approached the impossible trio. The story came out in a halting, terrified flood. Izuku explained everything, his words tumbling over one another as he recounted the discovery at the shrine, the hatching of the egg, the telepathic bond, the mark that had appeared on his hand. He showed Toshinori the silver-green symbol, which seemed to pulse with a faint light under the hero's intense gaze. He explained Ethel's rapid growth, their secret life on the beach, and the symbiotic transference of strength that was reshaping his own body. And finally, his voice dropping to a guilty whisper, he confessed to the incident at the warehouse. "I heard the news," he mumbled, staring at his feet. "About the villains drawing all the heroes downtown. I knew people were trapped. I couldn't just sit here and do nothing. I couldn't. I'm sorry. I know it was illegal. I know it was vigilantism. But they were going to die." Toshinori listened in silence, his mind reeling. Every word the boy spoke was the truth. Naomesa's quirk would have had a field day. This wasn't a quirk. This was something else entirely, something primal and magical that had lain dormant in the world, waiting for a heart pure enough, a will strong enough, to reawaken it. He looked from the earnest, terrified boy to the magnificent, terrifying beast who watched him with an intelligence that was arguably more than human. He saw the bond between them, a connection so deep it transcended species, transcended the very laws of nature as he knew them. And in that moment, Yagi Toshinori was faced with a profound choice. The law was clear. This was an unregistered, unclassified power of catastrophic potential. The boy was an unlicensed vigilante. His duty, as a pro-hero and as a pillar of their society, was to report this to the Hero Public Safety Commission. They would descend on this place with every weapon and containment quirk at their disposal. They would treat Ethel as a threat to be neutralized or a resource to be controlled. They would take him away from the boy, dissect him, study him, and cage him. They would shatter this incredible bond and, in the process, they would undoubtedly break Izuku Midoriya's spirit in a way Toshinori's rooftop speech never could. But then he looked into the boy's eyes. He saw the same heroic fire that had burned there when he charged the sludge villain. It was a reckless, untamable fire, but it was undeniably heroic. It was the spirit of self-sacrifice. The spirit of a true hero. The very spirit he had been searching for in a successor. He had told this boy he couldn't be a hero without a quirk. And the universe, in its strange, unknowable way, had laughed at him. It had given this boy a power that dwarfed most quirks. A power that came not from a genetic lottery, but from a bond of the heart. His choice was made. "You are right, young Midoriya," Toshinori said, his voice heavy. Izuku flinched, expecting the hammer to fall. "What you did was illegal. It was reckless. You exposed yourself and this magnificent creature to the world." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. It was also one of the most heroic things I have ever seen. Izuku's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. Tears welled up in them, threatening to spill over. Tashinori's gaunt face softened, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. The path of a licensed pro-hero, the one you dreamed of, that might not be possible for you now, my boy. The world is not ready for this. He gestured to Ethel. They would fear him. They would seek to control him. You would be forced into a cage, literal or metaphorical. He took a step closer, his gaze meeting Izuku's. I told you that you couldn't be a hero without a quirk. I was wrong. I was a fool, blinded by my own experiences and the limitations of this world. I failed to see the most important quality a hero can have, a quality you have in abundance. A spirit that will not falter in the face of despair. A heart that will risk everything to save another. He placed a long, bony hand on Izuku's shoulder. It felt like a benediction. I cannot offer you a quirk, young Midoriya. I cannot offer you a path into UA High. Your destiny has diverged from that road. But I can offer you my guidance, my knowledge, and my secrecy. You are wielding a power that no one in this era understands. A power like that attracts attention. Not just from heroes in the government, but from darker things. Ancient evils who would see such power not as a bond to be cherished, but as a prize to be stolen. The unspoken name of All for One hung in the air between them, a chilling premonition. A villain who stole quirks would surely not hesitate to try and steal a dragon. The thought made Tashinori's blood run cold. You need a mentor, he finished, his voice firm with a new resolve. Someone to help you understand what you've become. Someone to help you control this power and use it for the good you so clearly intend. If you will have me, I will be that mentor. The tears that had been threatening finally broke free, streaming down Izuku's face. They weren't tears of sadness or fear anymore. They were tears of overwhelming, cathartic relief. The number one hero, his idol, the man who had broken his dream, was now standing here, offering to help him build a new one. He could only nod, his throat too tight with emotion to speak. Ethel, who had been listening and sensing the profound emotional shift through the bond, let out a low, soft rumble. It was a sound of acceptance, of trust. He lowered his massive head, his golden eyes blinking slowly at the skeletal man before him. He seemed to understand that this frail-looking creature was a powerful ally, a guardian for his beloved rider. Tashinori Yagi, Izuku Midoriya, and Ethel the dragon stood together in the misty, junk-filled clearing. An impossible alliance, the fading symbol of peace, the boy who was told he was powerless, and the last dragon in a world that had forgotten magic. All right then, young Midoriya, Tashinori said, a spark of his old all-might energy returning to his voice. Our first lesson begins now. Tell me everything you've learned. We have a lot of work to do, and a lot of history to uncover. He looked up at the magnificent creature, a sense of awe warring with his ingrained pragmatism. A new age was dawning, whether the world knew it or not, and he, Yagi Tashinori, had just placed himself at the heart of it, as the mentor to its most unlikely, and perhaps most powerful, hero. Deep beneath the shattered streets of Kamino Ward, in a sterile chamber that was equal parts medical facility and throne room, a man who was more monster than human floated in a tank of life-sustaining fluid. Wires and tubes snaked from his body, a grotesque parody of an umbilical cord, connecting him to a symphony of machines that hummed and beeped, each sound a testament to his brokenness and his refusal to die. His face was a ruin of scar tissue, a blank canvas where a face had once been, dominated by a full-face respirator that hissed with every artificial breath. This was All for One. The symbol of evil. The demon king of the modern age. He had no eyes, but he could see more than any sighted man. He perceived the world as a vibrant, chaotic tapestry of quirks, each one a unique thread of color and texture that he could covet, pluck, and weave into his own design. For over a century, he had been the apex predator in this new ecosystem of power, the undisputed master of this genetic lottery. He had seen empires rise and fall, seen society reshape itself around these strange new abilities, and he had orchestrated it all from the shadows, a puppet master pulling the strings of history. But tonight, he felt something else. A tremor. A disturbance in the very foundation of the world he knew. It was not a quirk. Quirks were familiar to him, each one a note in a song he had long since memorized. This was a different kind of music entirely. It was a chord of immense, primal power, a deep, resonant hum that spoke of ancient earth, wild skies, and untamed fire. It was a power he had not felt in centuries. He had dismissed it at first, a faint, fleeting echo from the past, likely a bizarre new quirk manifestation that mimicked the old energies. But then came the reports from the port incident. His underlings had failed, their simple smuggling operation thwarted. They had babbled incoherently about a monster, a winged beast that had descended from the smoke. He had ignored their hysterical claims, attributing them to fear and incompetence. But the feeling persisted. The echo was growing stronger, less a memory and more a living, breathing presence in the world. And it was centered on Mizutifa, the very city where his nemesis, All Might, made his home. His respirator hissed, a long, contemplative sound. He replayed the memories in his mind, not the flawed, organic recollections of a human, but the perfect, data-driven recall of a man who had lived too long. He sifted through centuries of experience, back, past the dawn of quirks, past the age of industry, into a misty, forgotten era of swords and superstition. And there it was. The memory, sharp and visceral, of a searing emerald fire that had melted his quirks like wax. The memory of a roar that could shatter stone and will. The memory of a boy on the back of a great, scaled beast, his eyes burning with a righteous fury, a glowing mark on his hand. The dragon riders. A sneer, unseen beneath his mask, twisted his scarred lips. He had thought them extinct, a failed lineage of heroes wiped out by his own hand in the war that had preceded the rise of quirks. They had been his greatest rivals in that age, the only power that could truly challenge his dominance. Their bond, a symbiotic link between man and beast, generated a unique magical energy that was fundamentally different from quirks. It could not be stolen. It could not be given. It had to be broken, and break them he had. He had hunted them down, slaughtered their dragons, and shattered their precious eggs until none remained, or so he had thought. Somehow, one had survived. An egg dormant for centuries had hatched. A new rider had been born. This winged creature at the port was no mere cryptid. It was the return of an ancient blood feud. This changed everything. One for all, the accursed quirk wielded by his foolish younger brother and passed down through generations of sanctimonious heroes, was a predictable threat. All Might was a powerful but ultimately mortal obstacle. But a dragon rider, a rider and his dragon, growing in power together, their potential was theoretically limitless. They represented a different kind of legacy, a different kind of power, one that existed outside his control. It was an intolerable impurity in the world he sought to master. He would not make the same mistake twice. He would not allow this new rider to grow, to train, to become the symbol his ancestors had been. He would crush this nascent flame before it could become an inferno. He opened a channel to the doctor, his voice a synthesized rasp that echoed in the dark laboratory where his creations were born. Dr. Kyudaigaraki, he commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. The Noma Project. I require a specialist. Not one of the brutish, mindless ones. I need a hunter. On the other end of the line, the diminutive, goggle-wearing doctor squealed with a mixture of excitement and fear. A specialist, master? Of course. For what purpose? What kind of prey are we designing it for? The prey is large, all for one rasped, the image of a great emerald dragon filling his mind's eye. It is fast. It flies. It is highly durable and resistant to conventional attack. A flicker of annoyance crossed his consciousness. And it breathes fire. The doctor giggled, a high-pitched, unsettling sound. Oh, a challenge! Wonderful! I have just the combination of quirks and storage. We will need a base with a high durability factor, of course. Hyperdensity quirk for the skin and bone structure. For grounding the target, perhaps a localized gravity well quirk. One that can intensify gravitational pull in a targeted radius, and to subdue it once it's grounded, a variant of the Fiber Master quirk, modified to produce carbon nanotube netting. Strong enough to hold a battleship. Excellent, Doctor, All for One said, a cold satisfaction settling over him. I also want a tracking quirk integrated. Something primal. Something that can lock onto a unique energy signature, not just a scent or a heat pattern. I have a dormant quirk from a failed villain who called himself Bloodhound, the doctor replied eagerly. It allows the user to taste unique bioenergies in the air and track them across miles. It will be perfect. A truly bespoke predator. I will have it ready for deployment within 48 hours, Master. I shall call it the Harpy. Its name is irrelevant, all for one hissed. Its function is all that matters. Its objective is simple, capture the dragon. Alive, if possible. I wish to study the source of its power before I extinguish it. And the boy, bring me the boy. I have questions for the last of the dragon riders. The connection closed, leaving all for one to float in the silence of his chamber. The hum of this ancient power was a discordant note in his symphony of control, and he would silence it. This was not just a strategic move. This was personal. This was the final, definitive erasure of a rival legacy. The age of dragons was over. He had ended it once before, and he would end it again. The salt-laced wind whipped around Izuku, cold and sharp, but he barely felt it. He was perched on Ethel's back, 100 meters above the crashing waves of Dagoba Beach, perfectly still. Below them, Toshinori Yagi stood on the sand, a frail silhouette against the pale morning light, shouting instructions that were carried away by the wind but perfectly clear in Izuku's mind. Their training had entered a new phase under All Might's tutelage. The symbol of peace, it turned out, was a brutally effective, if unconventional, teacher. He pushed them relentlessly, his decades of combat experience providing a framework for Izuku's raw, analytical approach. Your greatest strength is your synergy. All Might had explained during their first official session. You are not a boy and a dragon. You are a single combat unit. You must think as one, move as one, breathe as one. Your minds are already linked. Now, your bodies must follow. The exercise was deceptively simple, aerial maneuvering. Toshinori would call out complex flight patterns, tight spirals, barrel rolls, sudden dives, and impossibly sharp turns, and Izuku and Ethel had to execute them flawlessly. It was a test of communication, balance, and raw physical endurance. Bank left. Hard left. Now invert and dive. Pull up at 20 meters. Here we go. Ethel sent, a thrill of joyous excitement in his thought. Izuku gripped the harness, his body tensing in anticipation. He leaned hard into the turn, shifting his weight to help Ethel's center of gravity. The dragon responded instantly, tucking one wing and rolling onto his side, the world tilting at a nauseating 90-degree angle. They plunged towards the ocean, the wind screaming in Izuku's ears, a plume of sea spray erupting as Ethel's wingtips skimmed the surface of the water. Then, with a phenomenal beat of his wings that sent a shockwave across the waves, he pulled up, climbing vertically back into the sky. The G-force was immense, pressing Izuku deep into his saddle. His enhanced physiology, a gift from the bond, was the only thing that kept him from blacking out. Better! Toshinori's distant voice praised. But your transition from the dive to the climb was half a second too slow. An enemy could exploit that. Again, they had been at it for hours, since before the sun had even risen. Izuku's muscles ached, and a deep, bone-weary exhaustion was setting in. But he wouldn't complain. Every successful maneuver, every bit of progress, was a small victory. He was learning to control this impossible power, to harness it. He was becoming a hero, in his own strange, secret way. He pushes us hard, this little stick man, Ethel commented, his mental voice laced with a grudging respect. He's preparing us, Izuku sent back, his focus unwavering. He knows we have an enemy. An enemy we can't even see. The mention of the unseen threat sent a chill through their bond. All Might had been grimly candid about the danger All for One represented. He had described a villain who coveted power above all else, a monster who would undoubtedly see Ethel as the ultimate prize. The knowledge that they were being hunted, even theoretically, had added a sharp, desperate edge to their training. Every session could be their last before the real fight began. All right. That's enough for today, Toshinori finally called out. Bring him in for a landing, young Midoriya. We need to work on your ground-to-air transitions anyway. With a sense of shared relief, Ethel began a slow, circling descent. Izuku was scanning their surroundings, a habit All Might had drilled into him. Always be aware. Always check your six. The sky was clear, the horizon empty save for a few distant cargo ships. The beach was deserted. Everything was normal. The attack came with no warning. One moment, they were gliding peacefully towards the shore. The next, the world beneath them seemed to lurch. Ethel let out a startled, pained roar as an invisible force seized him, dragging him from the sky as if he were caught in the grip of a giant, unseen hand. What is this? The dragon roared in Izuku's mind, his panic a physical blow. The air, it's heavy. I can't. His wings beat furiously, straining against the unseen pressure, but it was useless. They were plummeting. Young Midoriya. Evasive action. Now. All Might's voice was a sharp crack of alarm from the ground. On the peak of the tallest junk pile, a new figure stood, where moments before there had been nothing. It was a Nomu. But it was unlike the brutish, simple-minded creatures Izuku had seen on the news. This one was slender, almost wiry, with sickly gray skin stretched taut over a corded, muscular frame. Its bird-like head had no eyes, only a gaping, serrated beak, and its exposed brain pulsed with a sickening, greenish light. Its long, gangly arms ended in sharp, talon-like fingers. This was not a blunt instrument. It was a predator. A hunter. The harpy. The Noma had one hand outstretched towards them, palm open. At the center of its palm, the air itself seemed to warp and distort. A localized gravity well. That was the source of the pressure. They were 20 meters from the ground and falling fast. Ethel! Fold your wings! We need to dive, use the momentum! Izuku yelled, his mind racing, pushing past the panic. He sent a quick, frantic schematic through their bond, used the Nomu's own quirk against it by accelerating their descent, then pull up at the last possible second. Ethel tucked his wings, and their fall became a terrifying, headlong dive. The ground rushed up to meet them. 10 meters. 5. Now! Ethel threw his wings open with a deafening crack. The strain was incredible. Izuku heard a sound like tearing cartilage and felt a sharp spike of Ethel's pain. But it worked. They bottomed out just a meter above the sand, their momentum carrying them forward in a low, blistering fast glide, directly towards the shore, and All Might. The Nomu, perched on its junk pile throne, tilted its head, an unnervingly intelligent gesture. It let out a piercing, raptor-like screech and leaped. Its descent was unnaturally slow, cushioned by its own gravity-defying quirk. As it drifted downwards, its other hand snapped forward. From its fingertips, a shimmering, black net erupted, expanding with impossible speed. It wasn't made of rope. It was woven from threads of pure darkness that seemed to drink the very light from the air. Carbon nanotube netting. Scatter! All Might roared, already beginning to bulk up, steam pouring from his body as he transformed into his muscle form. Ethel veered sharply, but the net was too fast, too wide. It swept over them, and the moment it made contact, it contracted. The black fibers clung to Ethel's wings and body, and a powerful electrical current sizzled across their surface. Ethel bellowed in agony as the electricity coursed through him, his muscles locking up. Their forward momentum died, and they crashed into the sand with a ground-shaking thud, tangled in the crackling, energy-leaching net. Izuku was thrown from the saddle, landing hard on the sand, the wind knocked out of him. He scrambled to his feet, his head spinning. Ethel was thrashing, roaring in fury and pain, but the net was impossibly strong, tightening with every movement. The harpy landed silently a few dozen meters away, its eyeless face fixed on the ensnared dragon. Its beak opened, and a voice, a grotesque, synthesized composite of a dozen different vocal cords, echoed across the beach. Target acquired. Rider identified. Commencing subjugation. It began to walk towards them, a slow, deliberate, terrifyingly confident stride. I don't think so, villain! A familiar, booming voice declared. All Might, now in his full, heroic form, landed between the Nomu and the struggling dragon, the impact of his landing shaking the beach. He stood as a human bulwark, his iconic smile a grim line of determination. You have picked the wrong beach to play on. The Nomu showed no fear. It simply tilted its head again. Obstacle identified. All Might. Priority override, neutralize obstacle, subjugate targets. It moved with a speed that defied its lanky frame. It lunged, its talons extended, aiming for All Might's gut. The symbol of peace met the charge with a thunderous punch. Texas smash. The force of the blow was cataclysmic. The air pressure alone created a crater in the sand. A normal villain would have been vaporized. The Nomu, however, was sent flying, but it was not destroyed. It hit a junk pile 100 meters away with a crash of rending metal and was on its feet a moment later, its hyperdense body seemingly undamaged, save for a slight dent in its chest. All Might stared, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. He had put nearly 80% of his power into that punch. This thing was on a completely different level from the Nomu at the USJ. It was designed, from the ground up, to be a hero killer. A symbol killer. As All Might engaged the harpy in a brutal, earth-shaking brawl, Izuku scrambled over to Ethel. The dragon's struggles were growing weaker, the energy-draining net taking its toll. Izuku, the net, it burns. Ethel sent, his thought laced with pain. I know. Hold on. Izuku's mind was a whirlwind of analysis. The net was the key. He grabbed one of the fibers. It was thin as a spider's thread but utterly unbreakable. A powerful electric shock jolted his arm, making him cry out and snatch his hand back. He couldn't tear it. He couldn't break it. He looked back at the fight. All Might was on the defensive. The Nomu was terrifyingly versatile. It would use its gravity well quirk to slow All Might's punches, then lash out with its talons. It was intelligent, adapting its strategy, predicting All Might's moves. All Might was powerful, but he was a brawler. This Nomu was a fencer, a precision instrument of death, and All Might's time limit was ticking down. Izuku could already see a faint wisp of steam rising from his mentor's body. They were going to lose. All Might would run out of time, and the Nomu would take them. He had to do something. Think, Izuku, think. Quirks are like muscles. They have limits, weaknesses. What is its weakness? His eyes darted between the Nomu, the net, and Ethel. The net had come from the Nomu's fingertips. A projection-type quirk. Such quirks often had a finite range or a connection to the user. What if the net was still connected? What if it drew its power directly from the Nomu? He focused on the net again, his rider-enhanced senses straining. He saw it then. Faint, almost invisible threads of energy, like shimmering heat haze, leading from the net back towards the harpy. That was it. The net was a part of the Nomu. A projection that needed a constant supply of energy. If he could overload it. Ethel! He projected, his thought sharp and desperate. I need your fire. All of it. Not at the net. Aim for me. Aim for the mark on my hand. Ethel's panicked confusion flooded their bond. What? Izuku, no. I will burn you. You won't. Trust me. Our bond, it protects me. The mark is a conduit. I can channel your power. All Might taught me the theory, now we have to try it. It's our only chance. Do it. He saw All Might take another heavy blow, the hero staggering back, coughing up a small spray of blood. They were out of time. Trust me, Ethel. Izuku screamed in his mind, pouring every ounce of his conviction, his fear, and his desperate hope into the thought. The dragon's hesitation vanished, replaced by a surge of absolute, unwavering faith. A deep, rumbling growl started in his chest. The glow returned to his throat, but this time it was not orange. It was a brilliant, blinding emerald green, the color of his scales, the color of their bond. It was the color of his very soul. Now! Izuku yelled, thrusting his right hand forward, the silver-green mark of the rider facing the dragon. Ethel unleashed his fire. It was not a puff of flame. It was a concentrated, lance-like torrent of pure magical energy. It struck Izuku's outstretched hand, and for a terrifying second, he was engulfed in an inferno of green fire. But it didn't burn. The energy surged into the rider's mark, which flared with a light so bright it was like a small sun. Pain, white-hot and excruciating, shot up Izuku's arm, but it was the pain of a circuit being overloaded, not the pain of burning flesh. Power, raw and untamed, flooded his body. His vision turned green. He could feel Ethel's strength, his fire, his very life force, pouring into him. He screamed, a raw, primal sound, and focused all of that energy, all of that borrowed power, into a single point. He slammed his glowing hand onto the energy-draining net. The result was explosive. Emerald fire, his fire now, erupted from his hand, not as a stream, but as a devastating wave. It didn't travel over the net, it traveled through it, using the energy-leaching fibers as a conductor. The feedback loop was instantaneous. The green, magical fire, an energy the net was not designed to handle, surged back up the invisible connection to its source. The harpy, in the middle of dodging a punch from All Might, suddenly let out a deafening, agonized shriek. The hand that had generated the net exploded in a shower of gray flesh and green light. The net itself, its power source severed, dissolved into black ash. Ethel was free. The gnome staggered back, clutching the smoking stump of its arm, its screech of agony echoing across the beach. All Might, seeing his opening, did not hesitate. He poured every last, fading ember of One for All into a final, desperate attack. United States of Smash, his fist, a comet of righteous fury, connected with the gnome's head. The impact was absolute. The creature's hyperdense skull imploded, and its body was driven into the sand with such force that it created a 10-meter-deep crater. Silence descended upon the beach, broken only by the crash of the waves and the heavy, ragged breathing of the victors. All Might, steam pouring from his body, collapsed to his knees, his transformation flickering and failing, leaving the skeletal Tashinori in his place. He was at his limit. Izuku was on the ground, his right arm numb and smoking, his body feeling like it had been run over by a truck. The backlash from channeling so much power was agonizing, but he was grinning, a tired, painful, triumphant grin. We did it. Ethel, bruised and exhausted but free, nudged him gently with his snout, a wave of overwhelming pride, love, and relief washing through their bond. We did it, my rider. But the battle wasn't over. From the depths of the crater, a sickening, wet, tearing sound could be heard. The harpy, its head a mangled ruin, was beginning to regenerate. Its brain, though damaged, was still active, knitting bone and flesh back together at an alarming rate. Before anyone could react, a swirling vortex of black, viscous sludge appeared beside the crater. A figure in a sharp suit with a metallic, fog-like head emerged. Kurogyri. Retrieval complete, the Warp Gate villain said in his calm, baritone voice. He reached into the crater and pulled the regenerating gnome through the portal. He gave the exhausted heroes a final, chilling look. My master is displeased. He will have what he desires. The legacy of the riders will end. The portal snapped shut, and they were gone. Izuku, Tashinori, and Ethel were left alone on the cratered, smoking battlefield. The victory felt hollow, the enemy's escape a grim promise of future battles. They had survived, but they had also been tested, measured, and found wanting. Tashinori coughed, a racking, painful sound, spitting a trickle of blood onto the sand. That was a message, young Midoriya. He knows. All for One knows about you, and he has built a weapon specifically to hunt you. Izuku, with Ethel's help, struggled to his feet. He looked at his mentor, at his draconic partner, and then at the empty sky where the villains had vanished. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach. But it was overshadowed by a new, hard-edged resolve. They had been ambushed. They had been pushed to their absolute limit. But they had won. They had adapted, overcome, and unlocked a new level of their power. Let him come, Izuku thought, his hand clenching into a fist, the rider's mark on its back still faintly glowing. Let the ancient enemy send his monsters. They would be ready. The legacy of the riders would not end in the ashes of the past. It would be forged anew, in emerald fire.